in the English sense of the term, in the sense that it intrigued, say, Evil in War or
You're not
Kingsley Amis.
dissecting fine distinctions in class.
No, I'm not interested in class in that sense. I mean, I'm much more interested in, what lies inside the animal. And I think, I think human beings are rather dangerous. And they do have reserves of psychopathic behavior, which they call on, at certain times. But there we are.
In Miracles of Life, you talk quite a lot about your discovery of psychoanalysis and surrealism, and I wonder whether you could say a bit about how that mapped onto what had happened to you previously, or the version of life which you were thinking about previously. I mean, it seems to be have the character of sort of recognition.
Yeah, I mean, think about my wartime experiences, and the whole experience of Shanghai, which itself was a war zone from 1937 onwards, really, was that it left me when I came to England with a lot of questions about, who are we? What's the nature of reality? And also, who am I? Because, I was well aware during the internment years that I was wrapped up in the war in ways that most other people weren't. Teenage boys are always looking for someone to hero worship, but I think I did admire the Japanese for reasons I wouldn't feel today, but
just because they were powerful in that situation, or
they were brave. You see, and that's very important to a 12-year-old. I mean, the way they defeated the British Army with an army 3 times the strength of the Japanese at Singapore, the way they sank the Repulse of the Prince of Wales, which had been sent up without any air cover to teach those little nips a lesson. I can hear the voices to this day. I rather sort of looked down on the sort of British valour and rather admired the Japanese. But of course, as the war moved on, I found new heroes to worship, in particular the US Air Force. That was childhood. I was aware at the time that I was sort of more involved with some of the some of the more dubious aspects of the war. I mean, motives become tremendously confused. I mean, to some extent, I wanted the war to continue, partly because I knew that we were safe as long as the Japanese were guarding the camp, and partly because the war released certain feelings that aren't visible, in peacetime, and feelings in my own, the war clearly touched my imagination in a very special way, and I needed answers. So, to go back to your question, some of those answers seem to be provided by surrealism and psychoanalysis. You know, the
anything, any particular
Well,
surrealist work that you'd point to as being very important to you at that time?
well, you know, I remember reading Civilization and Its Discontents. This is when I was at school in England, at the age of 16 and 17. And the Surrealists, of course, duplicated so many of in their paintings, so many of the scenes that I'd seen in Shanghai during the war. Because, I mean, war is rather surrealist. I mean, you see photos of the Blitz in London, and, you know, buses on top of blocks of flats.
Landscapes,
and all that.
Impossible things.
Yeah, incredible juxtapositions.
But talk a bit about science fiction and about the opposition that you draw between outer space and inner space as sort of roots for science fiction to go with you firmly in the latter that can.
Right. I mean, as I say in the autobiography, I was unusual among science fiction writers in not having really read any when I started writing SF. In my mid-20s, I read novels by H.G. Wells. I read Wells novels and short stories, but not much else. And I was very attracted to science fiction because it had huge vitality. Meeting British and American SF writers in the 60s, I felt a sort of ferment of ideas and possibilities, which I never had meeting mainstream English novelists. All they induced was a kind of overpowering headache and a wish to leave, you know, for the South Seas. But
do you still have the same passion for science fiction? Do you still see it as a...
No, because it's changed. It's also, I think actually, science fiction has probably come to an end. It's simply because, you know, the world that science fiction envisaged is already here in many respects.